Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I have with me today the host of Secular Talk, the one and only Kyle Kulinski. Like I said, I've told Kyle before I started, but I'll say it again. I've watched his show for a while. It's on and off for a while. And I've liked the show for a very long time. So it is a pleasure to have Kyle Kulinski on the show. Kyle, please tell the audience hello.
Hello, everybody, and hello to you, man. And thanks for having me. I told you this just before we came on air, but I like what you're doing as well. I think you've released a lot of awesome videos. I love watching your stuff. I find that you're not afraid to buck orthodoxies. Like even if you're saying something that might piss off your own audience, you'll still say it because you're just speaking your mind, and that's really good to watch because oftentimes you see sometimes when people do what we do, they fall into this trap of always saying the thing that they think the audience wants them to say, and then they can become a little too partisan, a little too hacky, and it strikes me as, I don't know, just I don't like it. I can't watch that kind of, even if it's like 8% manufactured, 92% real, I'll sniff out that 8% manufactured and be like, I don't like this. But you're very authentic.
All the time. My audience has no issue saying, this is, you're talking nonsense, or we disagree with you on this, and we can go back and forth. It's funny that you say that. People who watch the show, it's hard to understand the pressures that are on people when they're doing the show. Because, of course, anytime you do a show, you're giving your perspective. But that perspective is in the context of eyes who are watching you give that perspective. And you are perfectly aware that there are like 100, 200 people watching you as you give that particular perspective. And you almost have to harden yourself against the criticism that you know you're going to get regardless of what you say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to be a lot more engaged in that sense, but I had some conversations with some other people who kind of do a similar thing to what we do. And we've all kind of come to the conclusion now that we're literally driving ourselves crazy if you really take in all the criticism, because there's going to be some of the criticism is going to be legitimate and it's going to help you improve. But there's a lot of the criticism that is just not legitimate at all. And what happens is they straw man you and what you believe, and then you read that and you're like, well, that's not right. I don't even believe that. And they're telling me I believe that. And then it's like, you want to fix it, but then you're like, what am I going to do? Waste my time? No matter what I say to this person, they're going to just assume that I'm not being honest, or I actually do believe the thing that they said I believe. So, it honestly is not good for mental health if you dwell on all of if people pile on you and you go through negative comments. So, I'm at the point now where I can't bring myself to be like Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky answers every single email that he gets from everybody around the world. And I sit there in awe of him. Whereas me, I'm the opposite. I'm a lot more like a weirder recluse now. Like, I'm more like Tiger Woods, who hasn't said hi to anybody who's not in his inner circle since 1997. So that's how I am. I don't like it, but I feel like I drive myself crazy if I don't kind of hide in a way.
There's no way around it. You have to harden yourself, man. It really is. Like, I think when I first started this, and even now, I tend to engage my audience a lot, because it's like at the end of the show, it's like an after show, and at that point, you spend X amount of time just talking to your audience. And for the most part, I have a pretty decent audience. They tend to be bright. Every so often, there's trolls. I tend to ignore trolls. But I've gotten to that point where, illegitimate criticism, I don't care. And I don't even acknowledge trolls at all.
Well, I'm sensitive. It bothers me. I think I'm sensitive, more sensitive than the average person. Because even if I see somebody strawman me, like, I have this urge where I'm like, I have to tell that person that that's not what I believe, and tell them what I actually believe.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you go, I will be obviously with an audience that has 600,000 subscribers. You're going to there's going to be so many straw man arguments against me that I can't possibly go through all of them. You know what I mean? I'm trying to fight that urge. That urge.
No matter what you say, it's
that instinctual reaction. Like, I have to correct this, but it's like, you can't. So you just got to kind of like hide away.
Yeah, I got to just move on. Secular talk. So why that? There was a woman who was standing on the side of the road one day. My wife and I, at the time, I think she was just my girlfriend, and we're driving by, and she had a sign saying, "Don't vote for Obama because Obama was supporting gays." Now, this fascinated me, and I had to immediately pull the car over and ask her, "Why are you holding this sign? And of all the things in the world that you could be out here protesting, why this? Why is this the thing to which you find to be standing outside on this day?" Why secular talk? I'm curious about this one too. Why this? Of all the things that you could have called your particular show, I mean, after all, you naming your show is christening your show. And this is not going into the Jordan Peterson argument where, was it Peterson? The religious guy that you were having a conversation with.
No, Jesse Lee Peterson.
Jesse Peterson, yeah. He sounds like he's been hitting the head with football. Like he has this, my wife was like, "What's wrong with him? Why is he talking that way?" But I am curious about the name itself. Why secular talk? Why distinguishing yourself in this particular item?
It happened. It was in 2008. I was 20 years old, and I just wanted to start a YouTube channel and like do it as a hobby. And I was interested. I came to politics in a weird way because I started like reading the Richard Dawkins book, The God Delusion, you know, around the same time that I was kind of interested in like Noam Chomsky. And I tried to read Noam Chomsky on anarchism when I was way too young. And I basically digested like 1 out of every 12 lines and nothing, didn't retain any of it. But basically I was really interested in it. And then also I was kind of fascinated at that time. I would turn on Bill O'Reilly's show, not because I agreed with it, but because I was kind of amazed by his ability to deliver a message. I thought he was like a really compelling speaker.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of this amalgamation of reading atheist books, looking at some Noam Chomsky stuff, and then watching some of Bill O'Reilly on Fox News. And I decided, well, actually, I'm really interested in like politics. And then I started listening to Air America Radio and Tom Hartman, who was one of the original people who kind of inspired me to do what I do, and not literally talking to him, but just listening to his show on Air America Radio and some others. And I guess secular talk was kind of the perfect mix of politics and atheism / religion, because I was interested in both topics. And of course, the definition of secularism is, you know, having a government that's divorced from religion. So when you're into atheism and you're into politics, it's like, well, I'm a fan of secularism. The U.S. is a secular nation, and why not just? And the name just kind of popped in my head, like, how about secular talk? And so I did it, and then obviously now, forget it. That name is synonymous with Kyle Kulinski, and that might even be more known. Like people like T.J. Kirk, the Amazing Atheist. Like he was for so long, people would call him like the Amazing Atheist. And he's like, he kind of hated that because it's like this moniker that kind of overrode his name. And it's a similar thing for me with secular talk. I don't think it's as bad as the Amazing Atheist, but it's probably like a 50-50 thing where, you know, if somebody knows the show, they might say like, "Hey, secular talk," as opposed to, "Hey, Kyle." So it just kind of stuck. But yeah, there was one time where we ran into an issue with it. Adpocalypse was when we ran into an issue with it.
I remember this.
Where we caught wind that it might actually be the fact that secular is in my name that made me on basically an ad blacklist. Like we just weren't getting any ads for it was at least like 2 weeks. And so I was told like, "Hey, you should probably change it and then it will fix it." And I took a stand and I said, "I'm not going to do that. Fuck that." Thankfully I was off that ad blacklist after a while, but that was the first scare I ever had with that name.
No, I remember that. I remember the show you did, and you were like, you lost like 90-something% of your revenue overnight.
Yeah, and then after a while, it was 100%. We just weren't making any money on any of our videos.
That's brutal, man. The way they do that, like just on a whim.
Well, that's the thing. I will never trust YouTube again, and that's why Patreon is so amazing. And the fact that the listeners are able to go directly to the creator now, I think that's honestly revolutionary. And Patreon really did kind of save the show. And what I did is I went to audience and I told them, hey, listen, I really don't trust YouTube anymore. And they could pull the rug out from underneath us whenever. So if you like the show, basically just donate like $2 a month or $5 a month. And, you're doing your part if you do that. And then that's plenty to keep this show going and to even be better off than we were before. So, and then a lot of people did it. And I felt I was really touched when that happened. I was like, oh, wow, this is real people out there. This isn't because, when you see it as numbers on a screen, like, oh, I got a few more subscribers. So sometimes it doesn't register, but then like those are real people like that. And then it hits you and it's like, wow, so we're actually having some sort of an impact.
I'm always shocked that I don't see myself as somebody who does a show. I just see myself as myself, if that makes sense. I know it sounds a little weird. I'm saying it in an odd way. People, I'm always enamored that people care. And I'm always, like you say, touched by it. Because I had the same experience where, I don't trust YouTube. I mean, they gut my channel one day on a whim and, remove the funding and everything else. And they do this, and there's, it's like the word of God. There's no, no feedback. There's no anything. It's just, this is a choice and this is what we're done. And so, sucks for you. What should we do about that? So is this one of those things where this gets into this conversation about free speech versus the digital commons? I mean, ultimately, we have the situation where we've given over our public space to digital space. So all of the dialogue that people have is essentially on social media. And these private companies essentially own all of the rights to this stuff. That seems a recipe for disaster, especially after, the stuff that's been going on with them getting rid of anti-war voices and everything else. So what should be the solution to that? Should that be one of those things where these spaces become, there's some level of extension of the First Amendment? Or is it, look, it's a private company and sucks for you and you just have to deal with it?
I would, my personal approach on this is I would regulate it like it's a public utility. So there is an extension of the First Amendment. Some people would go further than me though, and they say totally nationalize these companies. I don't think I agree with that. I just think they should be regulated as if they're public utilities. So there is an extension of the First Amendment on all these social media platforms, because in all seriousness, it is like Twitter is at the point and Facebook is at the point where they're so powerful and they have so much of the market that it's not just a regular private company. Yeah. So it does make sense to regulate them like public utilities. So you do have protections. And of course, the downside to that is, sure, you're going to have some crazy voices slip through and you are going to have the Alex Jones type of broadcasts. But that doesn't mean that we get to like throw out all these legitimate dissenting voices. And it drives me crazy that that's kind of used as a Trojan horse argument to then shut down so many legitimate voices. Yeah. I think that when there is a case of like libel and slander, that is against the law, and direct threats of violence are against the law. And I think everybody's okay with having rules around that. But once you go beyond that, it really is just a raw subjective opinion. And even if you're somebody who says like, oh, come on, man, there's a lot of crazy alt-right people out there. Yeah, but you know how quickly that's going to be flipped on Marxists? Yes. You know how quickly they're going to say like, oh, okay, well, if you get rid of the alt-right people, there are people who literally still do apologetics for Stalin. Stalin killed millions of people, so we're going to have to get rid of them too. And I think what drives me crazy on this issue is the blindness of so many people where they don't just take it one step further and think logically about it and go, well, this is clearly going to be flipped back on me and my community. So yeah, I think we need an extension of the First Amendment in terms of regulating these like a public utility. And I actually think that that's like the true left position on this issue.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. When Alex Jones was taken down, I was totally against that.
Yeah.
It's one thing if Alex Jones says something that's, like you said, slander or threats of violence or something like that. There are always goofballs.
And pull down that exact video. Like, first of all, have a process where we determine this stuff that's out in the open and is transparent. But if you do find like, okay, seriously, this one is in violation, like this is a direct threat of violence. Okay, well then pull down that video. the idea that you give somebody the internet death penalty,
Yeah.
like that strikes me as like such overkill. And it really does allow these, corporate elites in smoke-filled back rooms to censor people. I mean, that's effectively what's happening. And I mean, think about it. You've had issues with this in terms of your funding being dropped, and I was on the blacklist for a little bit, and we're still, about 50% demonetized from the peak, and many others are as well. Jimmy Dore, David Pakman, and others. And like, is anybody really going to sit there and say that guys like you and me are somehow equivalent to Richard Spencer? But according to these corporate, these elites who make these decisions, we are on par with those people.
Yeah, I find it to be disturbing. If you're going to take people down, that should be an open process.
Of course,
I was dramatically against it. I've heard people make arguments that, any random person can make a choice to take them down, like a company could just make a random choice. It's a private entity. It's like, yeah, but should they be able to do that? And
exactly, yeah, should they? That's the dodge. If you'll notice, whenever there's a free speech issue that pops up, that's the dodge for the people who are against that individual's ideology who happens to get pulled down. So you'll see people say that about Mark Lamont Hill, who just got fired for making pro-Palestine comments. So what you'll do is you'll have right-wingers who come out and say, hey, CNN, private company, they get to do what they want. But then, you flip the script and take somebody like Roseanne, who called, I think it was Valerie Jarrett, a monkey, said she looked like a monkey or something in a tweet, and then she got fired. Then you'll have people on the left who say, hey, look, man, the network's a private company. They could fire her if they want. So in other words, people are too busy trying to score partisan points when one of these things happens to really look at the bigger picture and understand that this really, even though these are corporations making these decisions, it really is the principle of free expression that's at work here. And it's easy to hide behind the legality of the First Amendment when it doesn't apply. But I think the actual brave stand is to say the principle of the First Amendment is still at play here, the principle of free expression. So we should all side as much as possible with, let people say whatever they want and don't give them take their job away from them or give them the internet death penalty as a result of it.
Yeah, there's something disturbing about that. Like I said, an internet death penalty, not to mention when it's coordinated.
Yes.
Facebook and Twitter and all these guys all at once start taking people down. Let's jump to politics for a moment. Kind of politics. So you got into a back and forth with H.A. Goodman. And in this back and forth, he made certain aspersions that I was like, yeah, that's not really true. So, but I do have one question. You voted for Stein. What state are you in?
New York.
Okay. Now, so New York is somewhat of a safe state. If you were in, say, like Virginia or a swing state, would you have continued to vote for Stein?
No, I would have voted for Hillary in those states. As much as it would have pained me to do it, and believe me, it would have pained me massively to do it, I would have voted for her. And I actually said that to my audience. And we had, I had a few conversations on leading up to the election arguing this exact position where I would say, in a debate of lesser of two evils, I do think Hillary is a lesser evil, but I said something along the lines of, if you're grading a test, Donald Trump might get like an 8% and Hillary might get a 32%. But even though they're both failing grades, 32 is higher than 8. So I would suck it up and vote for Hillary in those states.
Now, this particular, I would imagine your audience hated that.
No, they actually didn't, believe it or not. I don't think that's actually that crazy of a position to take. I kind of winced.
I'm more so going with this idea of like for example, I think a lot of us struggled with that question. You know what I mean? It's like they're like, oh God.
If you didn't, you weren't thinking. If you didn't, you weren't thinking. If you didn't struggle with it, you weren't thinking. So my point is, you're correct to struggle with that question.
Now, I am in a swing state, and I voted for Jill Stein. Now, I came to somewhat of a different conclusion on this. Mine was they cheated my guy, and it is a moral hazard to turn around and support the person who essentially undermined democracy and cheating of my guy. Now, what's wrong with that particular position? Or is there anything wrong with that position?
Well, first of all, let me just say, I have kind of a principled stance against voter shaming. So I'm not gonna be the kind of person who's gonna wave my finger in your face and say, "How dare you not come to the same conclusion that I came to, and you need to do that, or you're a bad person." So I'm not in the business of voter shaming people or making them feel bad for, coming to their own independent conclusions. What I always tell people is I can only tell you what my breakdown is and what I would personally do. And in fact, when I had these debates leading up to the election, that's the point I made over and over. I would say, listen, I'm simply telling everybody in my audience what I would do. I'm not telling you what to do. But what I would do is in a safe state, I would vote for Jill Stein. And in a swing state, I'd suck it up and vote for Hillary. And to me, it really came down to this basic idea. We're going to have to fight Hillary on almost every issue. Okay. But in the case of Trump, he's not pushable. Like Hillary is pushable. So you might actually get her to budge a little bit on certain issues. But Trump is not pushable. You're pushing an immovable object on that front. And then there were also just a list of issues where when I did the calculation, I said, okay, I see that I think she's a slightly lesser evil. Those issues being the Paris Climate Agreement for one, the Iran deal for another, the Supreme Court for another. So in other words, there's a number of issues where I thought that there was a genuine equivalence between Hillary and Trump, or it would be a toss-up as to who would be better. Like you could take the issue of trade, for example. On paper, Hillary Clinton was better on trade in terms of like what her policy proposals were on her website. But on the campaign trail, Trump actually was hitting the issue of trade a lot more, and he was taking a left-wing position and outflanking her to her left. So on that issue, you take that and you say, okay, on this one, it's a wash, and I genuinely don't know who would be better. But then when you do the calculation and look at it kind of like a math problem, I came to the conclusion that, well, Hillary, if she picks centrist judges for the Supreme Court, that's better than a far-right extremist who Trump would pick. Hillary would not pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, would not pull out of the Iran deal, even though she was initially against it. But now that it's in place, she's running on continuing Obama's legacy. So she's not going to pull out of that. Trump is saying he's going to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Trump is saying he's going to pull out of the Iran deal. And so basically, I looked at that and said, if I'm taking all of my emotions out of this and I'm just looking at it like it's a math problem, in a swing state, yes, I would suck it up and vote for her, even though I would want to take 8 showers afterwards. But having said that, I can't, like, when you tell me, listen, they cheated my guy, so I can't vote for her. What I say to that is, I can't blame you, which is why the real fault in this election loss goes to her. Okay. Like, it's not the onus was on her to get you. And what you're telling me is, Kyle, listen, man, she didn't get me. I'm sure for a litany of reasons, but also because they cheated my guy in the primary. So I'm not in the Hillary defense squad where I'm supposed to come out here and say, well, you should have done this and you should have done that, blah, 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 blah. I can only tell you what my breakdown was at the time. And all I could say is you telling me that just validates my idea that she was the one who fucked up. She's the one who didn't do her job to get you. And that was the problem.
I was gettable. I had no illusions about Trump on this. I looked at this and thought, both of this was a horrible choice from the standpoint of the election process itself. And I was stuck with this thing of the country itself is in an anti-establishment mood, and it wants something fundamentally different than what it's been getting. And there was an arrogance about this campaign where it was as if she was being selected as opposed to being chosen, which, this is bad on multiple fronts. Also, I was stuck with this other thing of, if in 2020, Hillary Clinton was running again, let's say she was running against Ted Cruz, and let's say she didn't do those things. Let's say she did pull out climb the court. Let's say it was horrible. Let's say she, got Medicare or something like that, some insane stuff, or started a war with Russia. What would happen in 2020? And I would imagine the same arguments that are being used now will be used in 2020 in order to justify another vote for Clinton on this. This seems to be like this kind of perpetual thing where Democrats have lefties back against the wall over and over again, year after year. And this thing can replicate itself every 4 years. How do you ever get any kind of change or any kind of difference in the system if you continue, if that vote is being made for the status quo corporate Democrat year after year after year?
Well, my goal is to make it so that we don't have to make that choice. My goal is, if we keep doing what we're doing with this attempt to have actual representatives of working people take over the Democratic Party, that we're not left with that horrific decision. Because I think, honestly, I never bought into what I call the backlash theory, which is the idea that, okay, in order for things to get better, things have to get much worse. And that's why Trump won't necessarily be bad for the left and bad for the country, because historically that has not happened. And that's why I don't buy into that theory. So in other words, if you look at George W. Bush, for example, just an absolute disaster across the board, started multiple offensive wars, crashed the economy, set up a worldwide torture regime, did deregulation out the wazoo. I mean, the list goes on and on. Everything was horrendous. And what happened when he did that? Democrats trotted further and further to the right in order to be bipartisan and compromise with him and meet him in the middle. So the more we elect right-wingers, the more that Overton window shifts further and further right. So in other words, the idea that like, well, hey, if Trump wins, then the left can be resurgent and, that'll give us like a clean start because it'll shake up the system and basically make it so bad that it has to get better. I never really bought into that, because historically, whenever you have horrendous Republicans in office, the Democrats just get worse in response. So, but having said that, you're not necessarily wrong about the Democrats. In other words, you get this weird rosy picture painted by establishment types where they say, well, all you got to do is elect the centrist and then eventually we'll get to some sort of progressive utopia. And it's like, no, if you keep electing neoliberal centrist corporatists, you know what we're going to get? Neoliberal centrism and corporatism. So we are left with this perpetual cycle of dumb and dumber, shitty and shittier, and, corporate and extremely corporate. And so, but my answer to that is we have to fundamentally break that cycle. And then the debate becomes probably why we originally started this conversation, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit. What's the best way to make that come about? Yes. What's the best way to get to a point where we actually have a choice between somebody who's going to represent the people and, some crazy Republican who obviously isn't.
Just a lunatic knuckle dragger. So that brings me to Justice Democrats. You were one of the founding members of Justice Democrats. What was understand the impetus for it? It's like, all right, we need to stop electing these corporate attacks. We need to do something about this. When was that started, and what was, I guess you can say, what was the origin of that?
Yeah, I think it was the anger after the 2016 election where we were, I went into it thinking they did cheat Bernie, and then they did force Hillary down our throats, and then Hillary went on to do the exact same things that we were warning against her doing from day one when it turned out that she was the nominee. And it's time for the Democratic Party to become what the Democratic Party should have become all along. And we need to make sure we have people who are actually on the left win, because the Republicans are going to keep winning if we don't have strong Democrats. Now, so it was directly after the 2016 election, but there actually was a discussion at first, and this is something that I've touched on previously. We didn't think, okay, we're definitely going to try to take over the Democratic Party, right? We had to talk everything through, and in those conversations, we came to the conclusion after a day or two and debating it and talking it through and looking at it from every angle, we decided, hey, this is the best way to do it. So we considered a third party route, but ultimately we decided against that. And we thought it would be much more effective if we decided to take over the Democratic Party. And it was birthed out of the anger of watching what happened.
Yeah, we all have scars over 2016. Yeah.
But the thing is, and I'm sure you feel the same way, if Hillary won, it's not like I would have been happy. I just would have been like, Okay. You know what I mean? It's like when Trump won, I was mortified, but if Hillary won, I still would have been like, all right.
It's funny when she won. I mean, when she lost, it was like, oh my God. But simultaneously, it was like, good.
Yeah, no, it was a little bit of told you. That's what I felt. Because you go back and you watch some of the videos where I was talking about, first of all, I predicted Trump's victory when only like 3 or 4 states had primaries and caucuses on the Republican side. I said, I think Donald Trump, it would be a minor miracle if Trump didn't win. This is when all the establishment pundits were not saying this. I came out and said he's almost certainly going to win. And then when we saw that it was going to be Hillary versus Trump, I did say my first segment was warning that Donald Trump is in my mind the favorite. I think he's more likely to win because of how the campaign's going to go. And I said Hillary's going to run on a bunch of platitudes and cliches, and she's not going to say anything. And when she does manage to say anything, it's going to be something pivoting to the right and pissing off her base. And Donald Trump is going to hit her over the head with fake populism, and he's going to hit her over the head with her corruption, and it can come back and bite her in the ass. And that's what happened.
That's exactly what happened. I mean, people wanted something different. The thing is, I know you said that people don't necessarily, just because you get a strong Republican, that's a horrendous, that you don't necessarily get this kind of strong Democrat. I think more so failure creates the possibility for change. And, it's her failing to this degree, to some degree, created a potential that I don't necessarily think was there prior. Like, do you think that the failure of Clinton in this gives lefties, and I know this is to some degree because of Sanders, he's created this kind of left of space for the standpoint of progressive dialogue and progressive language, especially from the standpoint of Medicare for All. He's opened this kind of space. But if she would have won, that space wouldn't necessarily exist. But do you think that at all?
Here's the thing about that. We need to make it so that that's the case. And I've come to realize this recently. Like, the fighting is never going to be over. Like, even if we had a Democratic Party that was all Justice Democrats, we would still need everybody to kind of stay involved and call your Congress people and complain when they're not doing what you want them to do and hold their feet to the fire and do various forms of activism. Because it's true that even when you elect like relatively good people, the system itself is somewhat corrupting. Yeah. So we just can never take our eye off the ball. I take your point in that, yes, it's possible that Trump winning did fire up the left more. But I think the problem is, it's like Donald Trump takes the ball and runs 100 yards in one direction, and then we like go and meet him there and then run 5 yards back in the other direction and say, see, now we're fighting. And it's like, well, yeah, but you just lost 95 yards, dipshit. So it's like, it's true that energy is there, and that potentially would not have been there if Hillary Clinton won. But even with that energy there, ultimately, it seems like it's more useless with him in power, because he has no problem just telling everybody to fuck off and continuing to do the worst kind of an agenda. But in a world that makes sense, and this is the world that we have to create, but it's going to take a lot of hard work, it needs to be the kind of world where even if Bernie Sanders wins, we all stay super involved, because it's not like he wins and then, okay, boom, we're all set and we're going to get Medicare for all. It's like, okay, he wins, and then guess what? You're going to have the establishment fights back, and the establishment is going to organize in an even stronger way, and capital is going to line up against him, and they're going to pull out every single dirty trick in the book, and they're probably going to try to Me Too everybody who's slightly left of center at that point. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a coordinated attack, but we need to live in the kind of world where this public pressure for stuff like Medicare for all and living wage and ending the wars and all that stuff, like, we need to ramp that pressure up even when we feel like we get small victories, because it ain't over till it's over. You know what I mean? Like, it ain't over until we actually get Medicare for all implemented. And we're a long way away from that, even though 70% of the country wants it.
Yeah. And that brings me to the JD thing, the Justice Democrats thing. My rule is support the candidate that represents your interests. And within the context of that, there are red lines. So for me, Medicare for All is a red line. It's this idea of supporting any candidate that doesn't support Medicare for All seems to be a fail. And the reason I say that is because if you're willing to support a particular candidate that doesn't necessarily represent your interests, then that candidate is not going to represent your interest. Like it's this thought of, if you want some level of change, you have to be willing to have a clear and bright line. The idea you have dollars or pitchforks. And I would give you credit in this case. The Justice Democrats seem to have brought pitchforks, which I like. And I absolutely agree with you that people need to stay super engaged regardless, because at the end of the day, you need some level of pressure on the system itself, because otherwise, the system just kind of, like you said, it creates bad outcomes just in the way that the system operates. Do you believe that JD is boarding the ship? And what does success look like in the context of the Justice Democrats boarding and taking the ship?
So to answer your question, yes, I do think that we're in the process of boarding the ship. I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be a long, dirty, bloody fight. But yes, I do think we're in the process of boarding the ship now. But I just want to take a step back real quick to talk about this strategy. So there's a couple questions here. One of them is an instinctual question, and another one is an empirical question. On the instinctual question, not only do I have total agreement with the likes of Nick Brana or my friend Jimmy Dore, and I think you're in that camp as well, where you'd like to see a third party rise up.
Yes.
Not only do I have total agreement with you on that, I actually think that that's my gut reaction even more than you guys. Like, there's nothing at all that's even remotely sexy, new, interesting, edgy about being part of one of the major two parties. It's so boring and stale, and you feel kind of dirty being involved in this kind of old party politics. And honestly, it's not something I want to do. I actually find it kind of hilarious that I'm now viewed as like this de facto spokesperson for, the actual left side of the Democratic Party, because it's not something I really want to do, because I am kind of, in my heart of hearts, a purist, and I like doing things the right way, and I don't like to compromise. So I agree with you guys completely on the instinctual question. Where we run into an issue is more the empirical question. And the empirical question is, when you look at what's likely to work, on that front, it's not even close. And the thing that I wish were true is just not even close to true. And I think that everybody on the left has to come to terms with that. Now, again, that doesn't mean I would never begrudge people who don't want to partake in doing what we're doing with Justice Democrats or in doing what Our Revolution or DSA is doing, because I think it's better to have people involved in politics than not involved in politics. So if you're going to be involved in politics and you say the only way I'm going to do this in any way, shape, or form is to do a third party, okay, by all means, then go right ahead. I'm happy you're doing something. But again, to get back to the core question, it's really just an empirical issue as to what's actually going to work and what even has a prayer of working. Now, to get to your specific question, so 41% of the candidates who received an endorsement from one or more of the progressive groups won their primary races. So the most successful was the PCCC. They won about 67% of their races. Justice Democrats and Our Revolution were the least successful. We won 32% of our primary races, but also, to be fair, we endorsed more people and took more risks. And also, of course, Justice Democrats has a rule of no corporate PAC money, and you kind of handcuff yourself up front in terms of an institutional disadvantage when you say we're only going to take small dollar donations, and that's what Justice Democrats do. So to win 41% of our races with these leftist groups, when we're at institutional disadvantage at our first crack at it, remember, a lot of these groups didn't exist before the 2016 election, I think that's pretty successful. And again, as a general rule, the further left you were as a candidate, the better you did.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of proves our electoral strategy. And when you look at the total numbers, now we have 7 Justice Democrats in Washington, D.C. You have 13 Democrats that are from one or more of the left groups. And you have 42 DSA wins at the state and local level, and a few national as well. And then you have 70 Our Revolution wins when you look at national, state, and local. So again, I do think it's in the process of happening. When people kind of question how far we've come to this point, that's when I get a little annoyed. You know, Nick Brana and I have been going back and forth in a weird roundabout way.
Wait, don't misunderstand me.
No, that's not directed to you. That's more directed at Nick Brana and people who kind of undercut a little bit our wins the day after. I mean,
no, I don't question the wins. Let me explain why. I looked at this as you guys didn't exist 2 years ago. Like, this is a brand new organization, and within the context of a brand new organization, you guys have racked up wins. So I don't undercut the win in this. I look at it as this is a new organization, and when this new organization is starting off, and I think I've even said on the show, I was like, considering all things being equal, they just started. Like this wasn't something that existed 2 years ago. So no, I don't undercut the wins. Why do you? I am curious though, from the standpoint of Brana is trying to. So there were two things. I think the reason that Brana was trying to draft Sanders is because he needed to have a lightning rod in order to pull support away from the party itself. He needed, a figurehead. Absent a figurehead, you run into this trouble of, okay, how do we draw a huge number of people from the party all at once? And that becomes somewhat of a difficult thing to pull off. So he's trying to do this, I guess, trying to pull lefty groups or smaller groups together in this kind of web, this kind of consortium of sorts. Why is Brana wrong? Or is Brana wrong? Like, Brana's main thesis is the Democratic Party will never change. That is not something that you can, the structure of the party itself is not built to get any real progressive change. And any notion of trying to take that over, it's going to essentially fail utterly because they're going to fight you tooth and nail during the process. Is he wrong?
Yes, he's wrong. And I think that last point is the point that fundamentally ended up getting under my skin, because if you're married to that idea that the party's not reformable and it's not even possible, so why even bother trying, then you're going to work backwards from that conclusion, and you're going to end up kind of downplaying and undercutting really important progressive victories when they happen. And that's pretty much exactly what he did. I mean, it was just like a few days after the election, he tweeted something out and somebody sent it to me. It was like this meme or something where it says like this big monster with his hands up in the air, like, yes, making this like this posture. And then you have like somebody bending down in front of the monster, like giving it a sword or giving it some sort of gift or something as if to hand it over. And it said, the monster said Democratic Party. And then the bending down thing said, like progressive energy. So it's like, oh, hand over all this progressive. And the thing that annoys me about that is it's just sloppy thinking to argue that, like, well, actually, no, for reasons X, Y, and Z, Ocasio-Cortez winning, that doesn't really matter that much. And Rashida Tlaib winning and Ilhan Omar winning and 13, Democrats from these different groups going to Washington, D.C. and now actually fighting on these issues like Medicare for all and free college and a living wage. Like, to downplay that, I think is fundamentally, even though I don't think it's his intent, I think fundamentally that ends up helping the right, because it might end up taking people and making them apolitical or making them not recognize a good thing when it comes by them. And I think that that's actually a relatively dangerous thing. Now, again, I don't think he's doing that on purpose. And I want to be clear. If you're somebody who says, listen, I'm either going to do the People's Party stuff or I'm not going to be involved in politics at all, then what I would say to you is, yes, go ahead and do the People's Party thing. I'm not going to define myself as being against people who agree with me on the actual goals. But I think the thing that annoyed me about what he did is exactly that. He is undercutting people who agree on the goals because he's married more to the method than he is to the results. And I care more about the purity of the results than the purity of the method. He seems to care more about the purity of the method than the purity of the results. And what I'll say on how I know he's wrong and how it's, again, this is an empirical question more than anything else. Just look at the results that already exist. There are 32 third parties that exist that have ballot access to one extent or another on the federal level. And of those 32 parties, you know how many politicians have actually made it to Washington, D.C.? 0. And even taking the best example of success, the Green Party, they have, how many seats do they have in Washington, D.C.? 0. They have 0 in the House, 0 in the Senate. They have 0 governors. They have 0 in state upper houses. They have 2 in state lower houses. Now, again, I'm not pointing this out to shit on the Greens because I support everybody who supports the policies that I'm in favor of. What I'm doing is making an empirical point about how successful they've been in their attempt to really change this country. And you could be the biggest supporter of them in the world. I've voted for more Greens in my life than I have Democrats. But again, this is a factual question, and they've just failed on that front. And I see no point in, ignoring that reality because, I care more about the purity of the method than the purity of the results. And even when you look at independents, there's a grand total of 3 in Washington, D.C. So when you look at all of this, plus the institutional biases against these parties, again, it's flat out rigged against them. If you're going to come to me and say, well, a third party route is better than taking over the Democrats, first question I ask is, okay, what's your plan to unrig the system? And if you're not having that conversation first, then you're just not serious about electoral politics.
Is it fair to say to some degree that you don't necessarily have to get elected in order to influence the system? Like, can an argument be made that if you want to save the Democratic Party to some degree, you need to be willing to leave the Democratic Party?
No, I think in order to take over the Democratic Party, our initial reaction whenever we have a setback needs to be, okay, no, now we need to fight harder and we need to get more involved and we need to not take no for an answer. And I noticed that there's this problem that we have on the left, and I think it's a problem that the right, generally speaking, doesn't have. And that problem is whenever we hit a roadblock, since people on the left they're more likely to be independent thinkers, when we hit a roadblock, the gut reaction is, well, this is all bullshit. Fuck this. Why am I wasting my time? I'm going to go do something else. And whereas whenever there's a roadblock that people on the right hit, I feel like their gut reaction is, okay, well, now we need to get more involved so that we get the outcome that we want. So, and I forget who made the argument, but they said on the left, it's like herding cats in order to get us organized. Yeah. Whereas on the rights, they're like a bunch of puppy dogs who are like falling in line and they're ready to just follow the path that's going to work for them the best. And I noticed this, for example, when the establishment checkmated us on Speaker of the House. So, and I know because I feel the same thing everybody else feels when that happens. When you see like so it's either Nancy Pelosi or somebody on the right. Are you still there, Jamal?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you went away in terms of your picture.
Where's my picture?
So it was Nancy Pelosi or somebody to the right of Nancy Pelosi ultimately became the last 2 choices for Speaker of the House. We wanted somebody on the left to mount a charge against her, and that didn't happen. And so this is an issue where the establishment checkmated us, and it's like, okay, well, the best you're going to get is Nancy Pelosi. And then a lot of people, again, totally understandably, were like, well, fuck this. This is crazy. She's a clear corporatist, and then somebody else is going to be an even bigger corporatist. I don't like this choice. I don't want to play this game anymore. But again, the reaction that actually makes sense is we need to harness those negative feelings that we got, and we need to take a lesson from that and realize, okay, well, this means we should have mounted a progressive charge. We should have been more involved. We should have all called our Congress people. We all should have picked a specific politician to become the next Speaker of the House, rallied around that person, and we should have been more organized and more involved, as opposed to sit back, see what happens, and then when something goes wrong, say, fuck this, I want to quit. And I think that that sentiment is unfortunately exploited in a negative way many times, where that feeling of like, okay, fuck this, I don't want to play this game anymore. A lot of people become apolitical, and then when you become apolitical, you make it so that the establishment definitely wins on the Democratic side, and of course the Republicans will win as well.
I feel you. I agree. I guess I agree and disagree. I don't know what's going on with my camera. I guess I agree and disagree. So the part that I agree with, yeah, I don't necessarily think you need to pull out of the political process from the standpoint of being apolitical. That said, I do think there should be a red line from the standpoint of supporting people that don't represent your interests. Like, for example, right now, Ocasio-Cortez, and I don't necessarily begrudge her for this, but she's been put in this weird situation where choosing Nancy Pelosi as somebody who's essentially worse. You know what I mean? Now, and being hobbled in that, Nancy Pelosi, the person who she's supporting, is essentially going to trying to push through pay-go, and not just pay-go, pushing through this thing of 80%, where they wouldn't necessarily raise taxes on the bottom 80%, which is just a Trojan horse in order to stop Medicare for all. Ultimately, they're putting through an agenda to prevent lefties from putting through their agenda and getting lefties to support the main candidate that's going to implement this particular process. Like, that's one of those things where I think it's a sober analysis of whether or not, as a lefty, you should be willing to support that. And I say that not necessarily purely at the presidential level. I mean, through all the levels. When, for example, Joe Manchin voted like 60% with Donald Trump. Should a lefty really vote for Joe Manchin? Like, certainly the solution is not just voting for any random Democrat.
Well, no, I'm not in that camp. I'm not in the camp of any blue will do. I agree with Nina Turner when she says any old blue just won't do. Yeah. But the point that I'm trying to make is broader than that. So when it comes to the Nancy Pelosi issue, the point is that was the establishment checkmated us on that issue. Okay. But the reaction shouldn't be, okay, now let's fuck this, I'm going to go do something else. The reaction should be, that means we need to be more involved and more intelligent in our strategy. So a bunch of the Justice Democrats, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they ended up saying, okay, you know what? We don't have a choice on this one. It looks like Nancy Pelosi is going to be the furthest left possible option, as crazy as that sounds, for Speaker of the House. But in the process of saying, okay, Nancy, we support you, they extracted stuff from her. So they got important committee appointments where now you'll have actual lefties craft legislation. Usually, historically, it's certainly in recent histories, lefties are not given any serious committee assignments where you actually craft legislation. They're put in committees that have not much power. So that's one extraction that they got. Now, it's interesting you brought up the PAYGO issue now, because the news just broke about 2 hours ago. I don't know if you saw it yet. The left actually won in scrapping the 3/5 rule that they were thinking of implementing. So that was one of the things that Nancy was considering. Oh, well, in order to win, I got to cave to the no labels, third way, New Democrat types too. So what do they want? They want this rule where you need a 3/5 majority in order to basically do any progressive legislation, to ever raise taxes on the middle class at all, even if it's offset in other ways. Well, Nancy Pelosi backed off that. Why did she back off that? Because Pramila Jayapal and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ro Khanna and a bunch of the actual good Democrats in the Progressive Caucus twisted her arm, but also used their leverage in saying, we're going to support you to become speaker, but here are the things that we're going to get in return. So in other words, we need to be more Machiavellian in terms of working behind the scenes and getting the things we want implemented. And that's one of the underrated aspects of FDR and Lyndon Johnson, for example. And this is something that I think Republicans have done very well in the modern era, is that they'll twist your arm and use any trick in the book in order to get what they want implemented. And now we need to be at a point on the left where we're doing that. Okay. But then also when it comes to elections, the electorate, so people like us, we need to do the same thing with our candidates. So before you were talking about, listen, we need to have red lines. We need to have Medicare for all, for example, is a red line. I totally agree with that. That's what we need to do. We need to say, here are the issues that we care deeply about. And you are going to support these issues. And if you don't support these issues, then you are not going to win. And basically, my approach. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. Because I don't think I've called lefties the political abused spouse of the Democratic Party. Now, I use that because I try to make this point that, it's like you beat me, you slap me, you sleep with the maid, and yet I'm still going to fix you a ham sandwich in the morning. So regardless of what takes place, at the end of the day, they end up voting for whoever the Democrat puts up. Now, I would say that's had a consequence. So after the 2016 election, you have people who were over eager in regards to accountability, meaning, every little thing that takes place, sometimes maybe a little bit overly so, they call the candidate on it. But they're behaving that way purely in response to what has taken place prior. It's not necessarily, they're creatures of their environment. They're just like anybody else. They're coming out of the environment, not necessarily coming out of a vacuum. They can't necessarily be faulted for that. But I think it takes both. So this kind of goes to the civil rights thing, like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. You needed both to make that work. Martin Luther King being a peacenik was great, but Malcolm X scared the hell out of people. I would imagine in the political equivalent of this is being where there's a clear understanding that either, there's certain lines or you lose, while simultaneously being willing to work within the political apparatus to try to get change. I like the fact that they work with Nancy Pelosi in order to scrap it. I'm more so curious, though, that what happens if Nancy Pelosi said, look, I'm still going to do pay-go and I'm still going to do the 3/5 rule. Do they still support Nancy Pelosi?
That's a good question. I honestly, I wish I was in those rooms when they're having these conversations. I wish I knew if they were doing a carrot or stick approach, like how exactly are they getting these extractions and what is the best way in order to get these extractions? These are all important questions. But again, to go back to my main point here, I like your point about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and I assume you're making kind of a parallel between myself and Brana, I guess, or like from within the party and with outside the party type thing. I don't disagree with that. But I think that we need to work in synergy, if that makes sense. I don't even know if that grammatically makes sense. But like, we need to, what you led with in this conversation when you said, I'll support people who support the policies I support. Okay, that's what all of us need to say.
Yeah.
And I guess my main issue with him was he didn't say that after we won. He acted like, okay, well, that doesn't count for reasons X, Y, and Z. It's not good enough. Yeah. And it's like, well, no, I thought, do you support people who are on the left who are fighting to get these policies implemented and who are winning or not? And I just got the sense that he simply didn't, because he wouldn't be undercutting us if that was the case.
I take Brana as kind of a different political party. And it's like if you were looking at a different political party in the UK, where you have the SNP, Labour, Liberal Democrats, Tories, and if you talk to them, all of them have a particularly different perspective, and all of them will hate the other party.
But then he doesn't support. But just be honest about that then, and say, I don't support lefties wherever they are. I'm more married to the purity of the method, and I'm only going to be okay with it. Like, what happens if, for example, we get to a point where Justice Democrats literally makes up the majority of the Democratic Party, and they're swashbuckling and getting through important policies like a living wage?
Yeah.
What happens then? Is he still going to be like, well, hey,
it's not enough.
Yeah, like, and that's the thing that annoys me is that, listen, and I don't want to pick on him, and I definitely don't want to pick on the people who are saying it's third party or nothing for me. Again, if those are the options in your own mind, then fine, more than happy to have you do it. I'm just saying, be realistic and be factual about the results, because Justice Democrats and the People's Party were created at about the same time. There's 7 Justice Democrats in Washington, D.C. There are 0 People's Party members in Washington, D.C. And that's not some sort of cheap point that's an actual empirical breakdown, because he said to Jimmy Dore, hey, man, listen, I'm a social scientist, so I have to look at these things in as objective a way as possible. Well, there's some objective reality for you. And again, that's not just them. It's also Green Party. It's also any of the 32 third parties that we have in this country. So, and actually, we should probably get into some more specifics on that, because when we did our research trying to figure out what the best way for the left to win is, I learned a lot. And so, for example, the U.S., I didn't know this, but the U.S. apparently started with no political parties. And Washington basically had no affiliation. So I guess in the modern vernacular, you'd call them like an independent. And then in the 1790s, you had two parties that emerged. It was basically Hamilton versus Madison. And so it ended up being Federalists or Democratic Republican. And then a little over a decade later, we abandoned party politics again. So we had a few different eras in U.S. politics where there were no parties, and then there were two parties, and then we again went back to no parties for a little bit. But then in 1829, the Democrats and the Whigs kind of emerged as the two major parties. And then in the 1850s, it became the Democrats and the Republicans. And then, of course, there were, the political realignment in the 1960s, but it stayed those two major parties. And so no third party has won a presidential election or majorities in either house of Congress. And that's a really important data point to me, because that's that shows that strategy is probably not the best strategy. The closest that there ever was in 1912, when Teddy Roosevelt won 27% of the vote and 88 electoral votes running as a progressive. And then you had in 1992, Ross Perot won 19% of the vote, but no electoral votes running as an independent. So, but that's the closest that they've ever gotten. And the answer is actually really simple as to why that is. It's not because there's not the will for that in the country. In fact, quite the opposite. There is the will for that in the country. It's about 60%. It's consistently been about 60% of Americans that have always said, I wish we had a viable third party option. But the reason why that never comes to fruition is there's a giant institutional bias against them. We don't have a parliamentary system. We don't have proportional representation, which is basically a necessity if you really wanted to go down this path. We have a winner-take-all system, which kind of kneecaps it up front. And then, of course, there's the ballot access issue, which actually wasn't an issue back before the 1850s, but then it became an issue on purpose because the Democrats and the Republicans basically rigged the system.
Yeah.
So the ballot access issue. So now, to even try to become an effective third party, you have barriers you have to get over that are basically impossible. You need an army of lawyers who are well versed on this stuff. You need petitions with millions of people, and it again, it's just rigged against them up front. So that's why I want everybody to be more realistic about it. I want to be clear again. If you only support that way, or you say is this or nothing, fine, then do that, and I'll support you if you're fighting for the right policies. But just be serious about the empirical reality of the situation and whether or not it will work. By my calculation, looking at the history of it, looking at the barriers that are in its place, it just simply is not going to work. And even though what we're doing with Justice Democrats it's also rigged against us, but the difference is it's slightly less rigged. We don't have the ballot access problem. We don't need the millions of signatures. We don't need the army of lawyers in order to help us. We don't have the same track record. In one election cycle, we beat the Green Party and independents and all third parties combined. One election cycle.
This I want to thank you for something, because it's something that I've appreciated about your approach. You haven't been a dick about this stuff. And what I mean by that is there's been divisions on the left, and there's been arguments on the left, as you've probably been aware. And they seem to have broken into factions. And you've been able to kind of dance between the raindrops within the standpoint of factions, and have tried to stay out of this, and just kind of dealt with this thing of, I'll support anybody who, is trying to get some kind of positive change in the country. I have to be honest, I've appreciated that. And I guess I'm saying this in the context of their voter shaming, because, it's like, how are you going to shame somebody for their vote? It's a representative of government or not. A person chooses who they want to choose to vote for. It's their choice. Either the candidate got their vote or not. It's not the individual's fault. and I even like your perspective on this from the standpoint of, look, if you're trying to get positive change in the country, I'm with you. That I appreciate, because I think that's the most rational thing in the world. I think it's rational for two reasons. A, it doesn't necessarily create a certain amount of animosity when you're trying to get people to back your people. But also, I think it's just honest. It's like, how are you attacking people for not voting for your candidate? So I appreciate that. I actually really do appreciate that.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I want people to be more married to the results than anything else. I want people, and that's why one of the many reasons why people love Bernie Sanders, and now they love Ro Khanna as well, because like what these guys have been doing, it's not only is it straightforward and brilliant policy, it's also working. I mean, look, they just got a raise for 350,000 workers at Amazon by pressuring Amazon and naming a bill. Do you know how much shit they got in Washington, D.C. when they named it the Stop Bezos Act? Every corporate Democrat within a mile looked at them like, are you insane? You're going to call out somebody specifically and directly, and somebody that has that much money and that much influence and that much power? And so when Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders did that, they're getting really smart and really serious about how do we actually change the world for the better? How do we actually get these policies implemented that we want to see implemented? And that's just a microcosm of it, because obviously, Bernie Sanders is not president yet, knock on wood, and you don't have a real lefty in office yet, but we're going to have to fight to get to that point. And then when we get to that point, the fight doesn't stop. We need to keep fighting. And also we need to get out of our own little echo chambers and patting each other on the back and kind of being in our own weird little niche groups. We need to get stronger and grow and realize that it's actually time to make these policies happen. And we need to make these policies happen by any means necessary, to steal from Malcolm X. And that's what I care more about than anything else. So yeah, there's a reason why I don't, shit on people who don't agree with me, and I don't voter shame people, because I care about the results. And I'm not going to get these people to vote for our candidates if I'm out there saying, shame on you for doing what you're doing and voting for the Green Party, and Jill Stein had no chance of winning and you should have known better than that. And again, even people who vehemently disagree with me on the strategy for whatever reason, ultimately my main goal is to get everybody to say and really believe, I'll support the candidates who support the policies I believe in wherever they are, and I'll notice a good thing when I see it. So Justice Democrats winning 7 seats in D.C., the Our Revolution, PCCC, DSA, Justice Dems winning 13 in D.C., and all the wins that we had and pushing the party to the left. Of course, the fact that they're now, I forget the original number, but now there's over 100, I think 122 or something like that, people who support Medicare for all now on the Democratic side in the House of Representatives. The number was, I think, 4, and now it's over 40 people who don't take corporate PAC money. And we're going to keep adding to these lists of accomplishments, but we have to keep fighting, and we have to recognize a good thing when we see it. And we have to care less about our little faction and more about actually winning in terms of results and getting these policies implemented. And I think that that's the only way that the left's going to win, because I feel like the right is better at kind of building coalitions than the left is. Like, if you look at the right, they have, there's an evangelical fundamentalist Christian faction. And then, there's also a libertarian business faction. And then there's the standard, traditionalist Republican faction. And there's and then there's the Trumpists who are, they're kind of a breed of their own. And it's like somehow they manage to all get together and they can aggressively push for the things that they want. What they're all about. They want to build the wall. They want, lower taxes on the rich. For us, I feel like we're a lot more scattered all over the place. And I think we're finally ready, that the left is finally ready to really get institutional power and do what we've wanted to do with it. because I sense it. I don't know if you sense it. I certainly sense it. I feel like the left was kind of, especially in the Obama years, there was no like canon of beliefs. You know what I mean? No like list of, hey, here's what we're about. It was just kind of this weird amorphous, like, yeah, we're on the left and we're not bad people and Obama's cool. And it just, there wasn't this sense. Now there's this like sense of urgency and this sense of clarity on the left that I've never sensed before.
That's true.
And I think that we can harness that into something really special and really great if we don't take our foot off the gas pedal and if we don't get too complacent at any one time, because there's going to be so many instances where we're going to want to be complacent and go, God damn it, that happened again, another roadblock. But I think we have to power through that and fight through it and make it so that they don't have a choice. The Democrats don't have a choice but to do what we tell them to do.
The sense of urgency, I agree with you. It feels like there's a certain momentum around the climate thing, but also around the Medicare for all thing. I mean, after all, at the point where you get 70% of the country agreeing with you, that's an argument that you seem to be winning. Not to mention Trump care and Obamacare, and both of which are, somewhat falling apart. It becomes like, all right, what's the last straw in the batch? Is like the single payer thing. So I agree with you on this. I agree with you on a few points. So support the candidate that represents your interests. Yes, I agree with you on that. I agree with you that it feels like a certain momentum associated with this, whereas during Obama years, it was like kind of dormant. It wasn't necessarily there. I agree with you on a lot of this. So I totally appreciate you coming on and having the conversation about it. I'm pushing back on it only because I wanted to sometimes I think tension helps create clarity in regards to other people listening to the conversation. And we're creatures of the left. And there are some creatures of the left that completely disagree with you on this particular plan.
Listen, and again, that's fine. If I still haven't convinced them, again, let me just say, then they let them keep doing what they're doing. If your whole thing is, listen, I do the Green Party and that's it, by all means, go right ahead. If you only do People's Party, by all means, go ahead. I'm not stopping you. I'm just saying that in the process of that, just because you don't want to acknowledge it doesn't mean the facts aren't what they are and the empirical data isn't what it is, because that you're not going to escape. And I am going to win that argument 10 out of 10 times.
No, I feel you. I think it's rational to say, like you said, if my guy is running and this guy represents your interests and the policy objectives is what you want, and not just what you want, if the policy objectives, if you believe the person is going to try to affect the policy objectives, then what's the hedge against supporting this particular guy? If that makes sense. It's like if Ocasio is running, just because she's running as a Democrat, I don't necessarily want to not vote for her, seeing she's going to represent my interests if I'm in that state.
And by the way, as I've said before, and I truly do mean this, if I lived in a state with open primaries, I wouldn't be a Democrat. If I lived in a state that had open primaries and I could register as an independent and vote in the Democratic primaries as an independent, I would do that in a heartbeat. Yeah. But I live in New York and we have closed primaries. So that's another, like, I have to register as a Democrat. So again, I think that the main takeaway from that point is, like, I want everybody to be kind of ruthlessly pragmatic about the way we do all of this stuff, because what matters more is getting the legislative victories and winning on what really matters. The purity of the method is irrelevant and isn't a thing. So let's say we wake up tomorrow and for whatever reason, okay, People's Party is officially rolling and they happen to get more Justice Democrats elected, more People's Party members elected in the next election than we get Justice Democrats elected. I will not be out here saying, I don't care about those People's Party victories because they're not Justice Democrats victories. I will be the biggest cheerleader for them because, again, it's about being ruthlessly pragmatic. And I don't care how we get the victories, even if for whatever reason there's a giant wave of progressivism in this hypothetical world we're talking about in the Republican Party. Fuck, I'll join that charge too. So it's just a matter of, let's stop with the the silly factions and just care about the actual results. And when we don't get the results we want, that should be reason to fight even harder. And that should be reason for us to get more involved, not less involved. And then if we can somehow train ourselves to do that.
Is there any situation where, and I'll let this be the last question, because it's been an hour. Is there any situation where you would look at this and say, you know what, it's unredeemable? There's, and it's kind of a question I have for Nina Turner. If she would have ever come on the show, she would have never come on the show. But where it's like, is there any situation where you're done with the party? And this was kind of for Turner.
We don't have that luxury. That's the problem, is that we don't have that luxury. In other words, that is not an option because any other potential path of victory is non-existent. Like, I don't think it's even possible for a third party to win, get the majority in Congress, win the presidency. Based on everything I've read about it and all of the serious institutional biases against it, that option to me is just, it's not going to work. So we don't have a choice. Even if we gained no ground with Justice Democrats and Our Revolution and PCCC and the DSA in taking over the Democratic Party, even if we had gained no ground, we wouldn't have a choice but to continue to try to do it, because that's the easiest path to victory, even though it's very hard. You see what I'm saying? Like, I feel like this is the main. I'm so happy you asked that last question, because this is the main point that I think people are struggling with, is that the whole Justice Democrats thing, it's not like we looked at a menu of equal options as to what we should do post 2016. It was like, oh, this is it. Like, we don't have a choice. This is the thing that we have to do. Like, again, nobody wants to do it. It's not sexy to be part of one of the major two parties. It's not edgy. It's not interesting. It's actually a really hard and annoying thing to try to get people to want to be interested when you did that. The establishment of that party did just screw over our candidate. Did just, like, they did do that. So with that being the case, again, the natural reaction is, God, I don't want to do any of this. I just want to check out of politics and get apolitical or do something else. But no, we don't have a choice, man. I mean, we don't have proportional representation. We don't have ranked choice voting. They don't even have ballot access. You have 0 out of 32 third parties in the country. 0 of them have made it to Washington, D.C. 0. So this is, again, it's not a question. We don't have a choice. They could spit in our eye and slap us across the face and keep screwing us. But our response to that has to be, oh, you're going to spit in my eye? How about I spit in yours twice? Oh, you're going to slap me across the face? How about I knuckle up and knock you the fuck out? Like, that needs to be our reaction, because, again, we don't have a choice. If we really want to get these policies implemented, we have to take on the establishment head on, and we have to beat them at their own game. And that means we're going to have to get Machiavellian. We're going to have to get our hands dirty. We're going to have to take over the party. And we're going to have to, do a monumental effort. And we have to make the next generation proud. It's got to be one of those things where they look back at us and they're like we look back at the civil rights leaders and we're like, damn, look at what they did. They need to look back at us and go, remember when they fought and they were able to get Medicare for all, and they were able to get a living wage and free college, and they were able to end the wars and U.S. imperialism? Remember when they had to knuckle down and do that? Like, that's the thing, is that we don't have a choice. And I wish there was dude, do you have any idea how much I wished we had ranked choice voting and proportional representation? Like, that would be the most awesome thing. I mean, that would immediately eliminate our entire conversation about lesser evilism. That wouldn't have to exist. That would that whole thing goes away.
No,
so I wish that it wasn't like completely and utterly rigged against third parties, because if that was the case, me personally, I jive with that idea more than I do with taking over the Democratic Party. So I would immediately try to do something like that. But again, it's just a matter of, I don't think it's even possible, which is why we had to do the Justice Democrats thing.
No, I understand. I get the principle, and I even, to some degree, I agree with it to this point, where starting a third party from scratch is a monumental task. I had a conversation with someone from Brand New Congress, and in the conversation, she says, "We're not Democrats. We're just running with the party." And she was like trying to make this clear distinction between who she was versus who they were, but making the argument that, look, we need the mechanics because it's too much of a difficult thing to try to start it from scratch.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're saying too. Plus, I don't know if she touched on this, but also just the flat out institutional biases which make a third party run impossible, kneecaps it from the beginning. But to add on to your point there, that's what DSA does. Yeah. So Democratic Socialists of America, for those of you who don't know, because when people hear that, they think like, oh, DSA is just like their own thing, like a third party or something. No, they're their own thing, but they run as Democrats because they say, even though we're not really Democrats, that's the only way that we're going to win. And so that's what they do.
Wow. Dude, I really appreciate this conversation.
No,
is
thanks,
there
man.
anything
I
else
appreciate
that you
it too.
want me to say before we part company?
No, man, no. If you want to plug your channel, because if it's cool, I'll throw this up on my channel later on and then get your channel more exposure and people could check it out because you definitely have some awesome stuff.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. No, that's totally fine. I have no idea what happened to my camera. It conked out on me. I was in an interview with Lauren Steiner. For whatever reason, I keep calling that woman Lauren Steiner, for like 3 hours, and the camera was no issue. No issue. And now it conks out. Oh, by the way, she wants me to pass on a message of please contact her. She would love to have a conversation with you. So.
Okay, we'll talk more about that off air.
Yeah. All right, my man. I'm going to end this here. I need to figure out what's going on with my camera. Kyle Kulinski, Secular Talk, everyone. I want to thank Kyle for coming onto the channel. I really, really do appreciate this. So
thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. All right, and we